Today we are tuning into a story about invisible real estate, a crisis that might not be what it seems, and a ghost in the machine that is completely changing how our wireless world works.
You know, we hear it all the time. We're running out of airwaves. Your phone, your Wi-Fi, everything is supposedly fighting for a tiny sliver of space. But what if that's not the real story? What if the air all around us is actually quiet, like mostly empty?
And what if there's a new kind of technology, an AI, a ghost you could say, that's already learned how to use that silence, slipping into those empty channels to move data around, right under the noses of the companies that paid billions for them?
Well, that's exactly the idea we're digging into today. And it comes from some fascinating research into a tech called cognitive radio. And it all goes back to a problem that's been building for more than 100 years.
First, let's talk about this so-called spectrum crisis. It's the whole reason we think the air is full, but the reality? It's a little different.
So since the dawn of radio, governments have basically managed the airwaves like old-school real estate. They take the entire spectrum, slice it into these fixed, rigid bands, and then hand them out. This piece is for TV stations, that one's for the military, another for your GPS. And once it's assigned, that's it. It's locked in.
And that system creates this bizarre situation. Think of it like a huge city where every single property has a giant no trespassing sign out front. Even if the owner only uses their house for an hour a day or is on vacation for months, nobody else can set foot on that land. That is exactly what our radio spectrum looks like.
So how much of this precious real estate is just sitting there empty? Well, get this. Studies have shown that at any given time, in any given place, over 70% of that licensed spectrum is completely idle, just silent. It's an incredible amount of wasted space.
And this quote from our source material absolutely nails it. We aren't out of frequencies, we are out of flexible frequencies. See, the problem isn't that there's no room. The problem is that our system for using that room is just, well, it's not very smart.
And that, of course, brings us to the hero of our story, the technology that was literally designed to bring that missing intelligence to the airways.
Meet cognitive radio. Okay, so a normal radio is kind of dumb, right? It's built to stick to one frequency. But a cognitive radio, it's aware. It's driven by software, and it can actually sense the world around it, learn from what it sees, and then change its own behavior, its frequency, its power, instantly. In other words, it thinks.
So in this whole digital heist scenario, you've really got two main players. On one side, you have the owners, the primary users. These are the big companies, the Verizons, the TV stations, who paid for their license and have absolute priority. And on the other side, you've got our hijackers, the secondary users. And that's our cognitive radio, always on the lookout for those quiet moments, those empty spectrum holes to jump in and do its thing.
So how does this digital heist actually pull it off? Well, it's not chaos. It's actually a super disciplined, three-step process that all happens in the blink of an eye. We can break the whole operation down into three parts: the eyes, the brain, and the escape. Let's start at the top. First up, the eyes. This is called spectrum sensing. Before the radio does anything else, it has to listen. It is constantly scanning the airwaves, trying to detect the signature of the owner to make sure the coast is clear. Because the number one rule of this whole game is you do not cause interference. Ever. And this is way more than just checking for static. This entire process is powered by some really sophisticated AI and machine learning. The radio isn't just listening for noise, it's learning to recognize the specific digital heartbeat of different signals, even when they're incredibly faint.
Okay, next comes the brain, or spectrum decision. Once the radio finds an empty channel, the AI has to make a smart, calculated choice. It uses machine learning to actually predict the owner's patterns. It might learn, for example, that a local TV station always goes off-air overnight, which makes that channel a perfect low-risk target. It's all about placing the smartest possible bet.
And finally, the most critical part, the escape. What happens when the owner shows back up? Well, the instant the cognitive radio senses that primary user returning, it has to vanish, just gone. It performs what's called a spectrum handoff, hopping to a completely different vacant frequency in just milliseconds, so fast that your connection never even blinks. It's like it was never there. So what kind of magic hardware makes this possible? It's something called a software-defined radio, or SDR. And what it does is pretty wild. It takes physical radio parts, things like filters and amplifiers, and replaces them with pure code. This lets the radio totally change its function on the fly. It can literally transform from a Wi-Fi chip into a cellular modem just by running a different piece of software.
Now, this isn't just some clever engineering trick. This whole work smarter, not harder approach is rewriting the rules for wireless communication. The future isn't about owning a frequency, it's about sharing them intelligently.
All right, so I keep calling it a heist and a hijack, which kind of begs the question, is this even legal? And for a long time, the answer was a hard no. Transmitting on a licensed frequency that you didn't own was a huge no-no.
But the law is finally starting to catch up. New regulations like TV white spaces, which lets devices use those empty gaps between TV channels, and CBRS are creating legal pathways for exactly this kind of sharing. So our hijacker is actually becoming a legitimate, authorized guest.
And where this goes is pretty mind-blowing. This is the kind of tech that will be the backbone of 6G. It's going to enable these crazy AI-driven mesh networks, where our devices literally negotiate with each other for the best signal. For the military, it can create radios that hop frequencies faster than an enemy can jam them. We are talking about potentially unlocking 1,000 times more bandwidth without building a single new cell tower.
Now, it's not a perfect system yet. One of the big challenges is something called the hidden terminal problem. Basically, a radio might think a channel is free because it can't hear the transmitter, but it could still be causing interference for a receiver on the other side of a hill or a building. The solution? Getting these radios to cooperate, to share what they hear, to build one complete map of the spectrum. Which leaves us with this final thought, this big takeaway. What cognitive radio really teaches us is that our scarcest resource might just be an illusion created by old and flexible rules. And by swapping out those rigid lines for AI-driven intelligence, we're finding out the airwaves were never really full. They were just waiting for a ghost in the machine. A radio that was finally smart enough to use the silence,